Hi, this is Mehdi,
Hey, this is Fran.
and this is Total Tactics Football. Today, we will be discussing the imminent departure of Sergio Ramos from Real Madrid. Fran, this is a very sad moment for a lot of the Madrid fans. How do you specifically feel about this, and what kind of caused this sort of deterioration of a relationship between Fiorentina Perez and Sergio Ramos?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started when, of course, Ramos's contract was up for discussion in terms of, Florentino wanting him to kind of accept a pay cut, and also there being a kind of historic agreement in the club in terms of players being older than, I think, 33, only being given like a contract renewal of an additional year. And I think Ramos wanted a little bit of kind of maybe of an exception to be kind of granted to him in terms of either giving him 2 years for the reduced salary or at least just 1 year with no pay cut. And I think neither side really wanted to budge from this point of view. And we've reached, of course, the point where 12 days out from his contract kind of being terminated, not terminated, but kind of running its course. We have Ramos now agreeing with the club to kind of provide a farewell ceremony. And of course, that's what we just watched today. Now, of course, the crazy thing I think is that, we all expected, I think, over the course of this year for one side to sort of budge or one side to kind of acquiesce to each other's demands. And that really ultimately didn't happen. And we've reached a conclusion where, Ramos unfortunately leaves the club that he spent 16 years over. I think in terms of Real Madrid fans, most of them will be in the short term very devastated. I think Sid Lowe was speaking about it briefly as well, just mentioning the fact that, of course, I think, well, right now it seems like Real Madrid have the structure in place in terms of having, Alaba coming in, Militao having a good back half of the season, and of course Varane still being there, although that's still kind of murky waters. We might discuss that later on, but ultimately Real Madrid do have some sort of plan in place to kind of fill the void that will inevitably be caused by having such a great player leave the club. And I think now it's probably worth discussing as well, like how tremendous his legacy was, given the fact that we know he's going to leave.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I think that's the first thing that we look at. I mean, this guy was in the world 11 times in the last 2 decades. He's won the World Cup, two Euro Cups, top most caps for the Spanish league. He's got over 650 caps for Real Madrid itself. Scored over 100 goals. I mean, most strikers or forwards are don't get to that numbers in top leagues. And he, as a center back, was phenomenal. And I think one of the most impressive for me, his season was the one before this one where he took Real Madrid and this sort of like post a Ronaldo era where Real Madrid hadn't sort of rebuilt the squad much, and Zidane had come back, and they were able to go on and win the league with him and Benzema being crucial to that. I feel like that is also maybe sometimes probably I don't know if they will be looked at, but for me that's a very incredible achievement. Just another one that goes to a player that's been excellent, a leader, someone who all the players around him feel like he's like as Tony Cruz mentioned that he's the best defender for him, and I think without a doubt, no guarantee, there's no question about it. The last decade, he definitely is, and he is up there probably as one of the best of all time.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about kind of how his peers assess him, I think it speaks to the fact that someone like Giorgio Chiellini considers Ramos the greatest defender he's ever seen. And this is a player that I think a lot of people find very controversial in terms of Sergio Ramos outside of Spain, I would say. He is known for being, let's say, a little bit more aggressive than most. But I think when you contextualize like football and you look at across most big teams, you have these kind of players who are not afraid to kind of create kind of controversial actions, for the benefit of their team. I don't have to necessarily go club by club, but you have that kind of figure, whatever club you support, like and Ramos is that figure for Real Madrid where he's willing to kind of scrap with anyone and cause damage or havoc, really, whether it's scoring goals or whether it's unfortunately injuring people. But I think people do of course overestimate as well how I think injurious he has been to players. I think unless you're named Lionel Messi, you probably don't have much of a reason to really hate Ramos as a player in terms of whether he's been a dirty player or not. And looking at that aside, I think just pure defending. I mean, Ramos was dealt with a very difficult task for many years until Fernand Mendy was put next to him, because the role of Marcelo for Real Madrid traditionally has been to play as a left winger. And I think when we look at the kind of progression, I think with fullbacks and wingbacks, Marcelo was one of the first, I think, alongside someone like Dani Alves, who played so high up the field. And the difference, I think, is, of course, while Marcelo is actually a good one-on-one defender himself, it's the positioning that really caused so much havoc for Real Madrid's backline. Very often someone like Ramos would be defending one-on-twos, on that sort of left flank, and he did so very admirably. I remember a game where a young Mbappe and Cavani as well were playing were playing Real Madrid in one of those kind of qualification games, and I was watching Ramos handily really deal with both Mbappe and Cavani, and they both give you such different kind of tests, right? Mbappe more of a physical one in terms of being able to kind of match with him on an agility basis. For example, you looked at Hummel's tackle over Mbappe the other day. That's where, I mean, despite you not having the kind of physical demands of being able to kind of cope with Mbappe, it's about timing, it's about positioning, it's about that kind of defensive positioning and excellence that Ramos actually has always had possessed. And as you say, I think rightly, that Zidane winning season, his last La Liga winning season, is crucial to kind of showing how great a defender Ramos is, especially when he's paired with a much more stock standard kind of left back, right? Fernand Mendy, of course, is immense physically, and he provides so much defense, but then it also kind of accentuates how great a defense Real Madrid could have been, if they decided to play in a much more defensive mold. And of course, I'm not going to discredit Marcelo, because he was one of the greatest offensive fullbacks that we'll ever see, and he was quintessential to many victories. The Bayern Munich one being a kind of key example of that. And I think the fact that Real Madrid became the most solid defense that season, when compared with teams like Atletico Madrid, who play in a very defensive mode no matter what, shows that Ramos had always had the potential to be an elite defender. And of course, earlier in his career, he was a right back, and a very offensive one too. It's ironic in the sense that Florentino Perez probably was charmed by his famous goal versus Real Madrid when he was a Sevilla player. And as you mentioned, he has numerous records in terms of goal scoring from a centre-back position, because when you compare it to players like Koeman or Hierro, these are both players who have kind of shared stints in the midfield. And I think Ramos's kind of offensive prowess as a defender is really bar none. And when we kind of look at, I think, his historic legacy, I think, yeah, as I mentioned before, there are many peers who really suggested that he was the heir to Maldini, and including Maldini himself. And it's amazing to see at 35 now that I think he is still a highly touted prospect. And with the exception, I think, of this year, he's been relatively fit for his entire career. Like, I don't think anyone can question his physical condition, and I think he will pay, or at least be an integral part of whatever team he chooses to join, really.
Well, no, that's very nicely put. With his imminent departure, and we've seen in the last few years the likes of Cristiano leaving, Messi not necessarily being the same as he was. Piqué, Busquets have moved down the pecking orders in a sense for Barcelona. Iniesta has moved on. These are the men who've occupied the world 11 for a long time. Ushering that sort of the dominance that Spanish football or La Liga itself had over the world, winning the Champions League. You can just see the record the Spanish league has held. Now, with these big titans moving on, do you feel that this is maybe ushering in a new generation of players coming in, and they will take the Spanish league back to where there was? Or do you feel that maybe there is a bit of shift of the power coming now? And then this might be one of those where we are seeing, for a little while at least, that the Spanish football might not be able to compete with the other leagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like two separate points, right? Because when we talk about like domestic Spanish football, I think Spanish football has been relatively strong, with the exception to the last 3-4 years. When we talk about international football, I mean, it's true that Spanish football has fallen far off the map from when they were winning Euros and winning World Cups. Really, that kind of dominant 8-year run was, I think, unmatched by most teams, with exception to Brazil winning between 58 and 62 in terms of those World Cups, right? And for me, what is so special about that kind of crop of Spanish players is that, in almost every position on the field that Spain would put out on an international level, I mean, that player was world class, and they were playing for top teams at the time. And now I think that's changed fundamentally. I think in La Liga as well, what we've seen is a weakening of Real Madrid and Barcelona. And I think Ramos leaving as well is kind of like a testament to that as well. I think he's one of the last few great players who have such a long tenure. I think Messi is one of them. Marcelo is one of them. And then you have players who, of course, joined later, like Modric or even Cruz, right, to kind of support the kind of domination of La Liga. And, we are kind of teetering away from this sort of period, but I imagine there will be a comeback in a few years' time if let's say, youngsters are being developed or if key players are being picked up. There are a lot of rumors, of course, with Real Madrid being able to pick up players like Mbappe and Haaland, and it's not happened, to be honest. I think a lot of the investments in recent years from Barcelona and Real Madrid, respectively, have been somewhat poor in terms of the marquee signings. And yeah, I think we don't expect La Liga to be dominant in the near future. I think the Premier League kind of holds that title right now, and when we saw that this year in the Champions League, and even 2 years back, when Liverpool and Tottenham were in the finals. But I think there is potential, after Ramos leaves and finishes his career, for other players to step up, both domestically in La Liga, because I think a lot of the other teams have grown, right? Real Sociedad, Sevilla. These are teams that feature these players that I think that could move on to that kind of echelon where they can be like a superstar player. We saw Isaac, for example, yesterday, or not yesterday, but rather in the Spain versus Sweden match, and he looked like an absolute world beater. And you have players there kind of playing for those clubs, and those teams are strong. But I think what will happen is La Liga will kind of have to rebuild itself in terms of how it also markets itself and its image. We've seen a little bit of a deterioration, and I think Atleti winning the title once again proves, there is no longer that kind of mono dominance from Real Madrid and Barcelona, and that kind of top tier is now perhaps even shared equally by Atletico Madrid right now, and I think that tier below is now kind of being eradicated. I think previously there was a clear definition in terms of there being a huge separation, and perhaps that's no longer there. We saw Sevilla fight very closely in La Liga this season, and we might see more of that in the future. I think if the commercial decisions and financial decisions as well for Real Madrid and Barcelona are continue to be, I think, of a poorer quality than expected.
Well, I mean, now that Ramos will be a free agent in the coming weeks, a lot of clubs out there are going to be looking at getting a player of his quality, of his leadership, and I feel like that could start a sort of a bidding war for him. There are the likes of the Manchester clubs that have been recently reported to be interested in him. With Manchester United, definitely be able to be excited to bring someone like him, and leagues like the Premier League could really do with a quality centre back or just a leader, as we've seen Thiago Silva coming from the French league and making himself announced in the Premier League stage. Ramos could definitely do the same. Friend, what kind of team do you think that Ramos would be kind of looking to go towards? I mean, maybe as a stylistically, or maybe would it be more for like financial reasons at this point? Because he has the choice to choose between the money or like just another club that wins.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, we reached the point where I think there are clubs that provide a bit of both, right? PSG, I think, just picked up Wijnaldum, which is a huge pickup in the midfield, and having Ramos in would be great. But I mean, I think Ramos is the type of player where he would prioritize money, but also I think like a winning destination. I think when we look at PSG, it's very odd, that the transfer policy seems to be perhaps potentially recruiting Ramos when they have someone like Marquinhos and Kimpembe. And that's not to say that Ramos is not an upgrade to either of them, but it's more the fact that they have clear gaps in their squad, and it's we're looking at positions like left back or even right back, that they really need to upgrade on before they think about getting another marquee signing in terms of a veteran player. So I think if their transfer policy is to be sound, then Ramos doesn't make sense for them. In terms of what Ramos wants, I think he wants to go to a club that has the chance to continue to compete for titles such as the Champions League, because he knows his career is very limited right now in terms of the amount of years he has left at the top flight level. And I think there's still potential for like a big payday in the future if he wants to extend that career past, when he is at his kind of prime, I would say. Because I think, of course, while he's not at his physical prime right now, I think defensively, and I think um, just in terms of a mental game, I think that's all there for Ramos. And you can see if you actually just follow him in general that he is probably one of the most dedicated players in terms of kind of maintaining his body. And I think this year was a bit of a blip because he tried as much as possible to get back into fitness to try and help Real Madrid, especially since Real Madrid have been suffering from 50 plus injuries this season. So you could see him being rushed that Chelsea game and it didn't work out. You could see him also being rushed to try and break the international caps record as well. And that didn't work out when he was playing for Spain. So I think now that he's had a significant offseason to rest, he could probably join, as you say, a squad like Man United, who probably are going to spend quite a bit this season. I think if Man United pick up the signings that they intended on picking last year, such as Jadon Sancho and some other pieces like that, then instantly I think Man United can become like, a title-winning force with Ramos alongside maybe Maguire. I think, across Europe, I don't think the Italian league really makes too much sense for him. I think the Italian teams have kind of fallen a little bit off the pedestal in terms of winning, so I don't really see him heading towards there. And when you talk about maybe like a return to a club like Sevilla or something like that, I still think that's a little bit out of the question, just simply due to the fact that they don't really have the tools to actually win the big title so far. Where do you think Ramos will go yourself?
Personally, I feel like the fit that, and where there's no obstacle standing in his way is Manchester United for me. So
Yeah.
we've seen the likes of Man City linked with him, but they already have three like very very good center backs in
Yeah.
Ruben Diaz, Laporte, John Stones, and it kind of seems a bit maybe unnecessary to add him there. But again, it's a team with sort of infinite resources, and Ramos could be the key to take them to win that Champions League. Just another, but obviously their issue is they don't have many issues. Their issue, if there is one, it would be the center forward position if they want to add something.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that one, it doesn't kind of seem like the model that Man City likes to follow much. They
Exactly.
don't look to keep the old players along for too long. So, and then you can look at maybe Chelsea. Their defense is good. And that's a lot to do with the system that Tuchel has put in place. And Thiago Silva has been thriving at the heart of that center back pairing, right in the between the three. But then again, they just gave him another year contract. Can you have Ramos and Thiago Silva both like plus 35 playing in a fast league? It can be a bit difficult, I believe, and maybe that might not again makes sense. Personally, if I was me, and no disrespect to Thiago Silva, I would replace him if that meant you could get 2 years of Ramos instead of 1 year of Thiago Silva. It's just fitness wise, as you mentioned, Ramos has always been a peak human who takes care of his body. He has never had fitness problems. The person has worked his career the way he moved from the fullback to a center back. The way he played his center back roles as well. He's able to he's got the passing ability. He reads the game, and he still has the sort of the athleticism to be able to compete against top forward. And that sometimes I worry maybe might not be with Thiago Silva just because of uh, the physicality of it, but obviously the knowledge and the experience is there. But it doesn't necessarily make too much sense. And as you mentioned with PSG as well, can you really just shift off two young center backs who are good and they've got a good combination going on, and whereas you need to actually focus on other positions in the team? So Manchester United makes a whole lot of sense. Maguire is a good center back. He's also the captain of Man United, but when you bring in a sort of leader and just veteran like Ramos next to him, he could learn for himself. That's going to be great experience that he's always played with the likes of Lindelof or John Stones. He hasn't had world class center backs as what in the yesteryears with Man United used to have, like with Roy Ferdinand and the Vidic. Throwing a titan like Ramos into that midfield and sort of that defense really changes it up. That gives the confidence to that back line, knowing that what, Shaw can push up because Ramos can do it. He's done it before. That protection is there. At the same time, you have the opposition will feel like just seeing the name on the the lineup sheet that Ramos is playing against you just puts a bit more fear on them, and the players will be overthinking, and that kind of just adds a bit more to Manchester United's like status. And if they get their other targets, I think this could be that little key that just quickly throws them into that title, contending mix, maybe even the title, and to the European Championships, like in the UEFA competitions, to give them a bit more of that experience that maybe this team kind of lacks.
Yeah, and this sounds a little bit crazy. What do you think about Ramos to Bayern Munich? Because I think there's a there is an exodus there as well. Boateng and Alaba are leaving. You could still play perhaps Lucas Hernandez at times at left back, and I know Upamecano is coming in, but there still is room, I think, for him in the squad. I think for me, the one drawback of Man United is, very much for people who come from, let's say, like a Latin American or even Spanish background. It's that kind of like, is there like that sort of emotional fit, right? Like English culture is very different. Living in Manchester is very different. Like even like, tropically speaking, like it's just completely different weather-wise. It's a different dynamic. And I think a lot of, Spanish players haven't really necessarily acclimated towards like living in England. Now, of course, Man United actually do house many Spanish players and have in the past, right? Ander Herrera, Juan Mata, David De Gea, as key examples of that. So that could be an interesting thing. But I don't know. I like the sound of Bayern Munich actually, and I think it's going to be Bayern Munich, PSG, or Man United for me, because I don't really see him joining a club, as you mentioned, where he has to compete for the starting spot, or where it doesn't make sense, right? Because there's a clear hierarchy, or at least a plan in future to kind of create a squad that's I think impenetrable in the future. What do you think actually about the impact of Varane and his contract extension?
Well, I think this kind of gives him a bit more freedom, that it gives them a bit more the chance for on the negotiation table they can sort of work a bit more terms. They know that the resources have sort of freed up with Ramos moving on, so maybe there can be that sort of next that little step that they needed to find that agreement between each other. And also, if you want, you cannot lose both of your two starting center backs. I mean, and like these aren't just your regular center backs that, let's say, like an Arsenal would have. These are center backs that have won nearly everything. You can't lose them both. With the experience that goes out of the door is a lot to change. And we'll see how Ancelotti sets it up, and it's going to be interesting. But I think this might be a positive for Varane, because Militao has shown at the at the tail end of the season that he is starting to like show that he can play in that back line, in the back three as well. But as well at two, I think he's starting to find his touch more. But still, with the likes of Alaba coming in, who could possibly play in any of the three positions in defensive mid, left back, center back, you can have a very technically able team, and at the same time being able to play the balls out of the back. Like we just saw Varane's performance against Germany the other day, and it was excellent. It was top flight. He's got the physical, ability. He's got the speed, and he's not too shabby on the ball too. Yeah, maybe not the Ramos level, but then you have other players there who can do it. And he's shown himself that he is a world-class center back. So I think it is important that they now decide, okay, you know what, Ramos has moved on, but their back line is a bit young. Alaba is 29, Varane is under 30s, and you've got Militao who's young as well. So you can make a little bit of a case there that they're maybe looking for the future. What do you feel about the scenario on Varane now, and after Ramos leaving? Does that kind of give him that chance to become the heart of that defense?
I mean, it really should, right? We saw yesterday. I think we saw in France versus Germany, like why Rafael Varane is a world-class centre back. I think he's like an impenetrable wall when you have the pieces around him, in a sense. And I think Real Madrid are at a crossroads where I think they're almost dropping too many key players and not getting much in return. So I think a lot of the investments in recent years haven't really paid out. You don't have any kind of new leaders, I think, being injected into the squad. I think with the exception of Alaba, of course, who's going to come in. And you need to still hold at least the pieces that have the experience, but also the potential to play it for a few more years. And I think there are two in terms of Kroos and Varane that are quintessential there, right? Because I think with Modric and Benzema, we know they could probably play, I think, 2 to 3 years at a top flight level, but there must be some sort of plan to kind of replace them in the future, no matter what. Whereas Varane can easily play for, we're talking almost even a decade. And I think if Real Madrid do drop Varane, that really is a big kind of crossroads for Real Madrid, where they clearly no longer have the kind of, I think, power in a sense to keep the best players willingly, right? Because I think the traditional relationship in the past between players and Real Madrid is that, if a player is not wanted at Real Madrid, he leaves. But if a player is wanted at Real Madrid and Real Madrid wants him to stay, then he stays. And Varane could potentially be one of those first players who says, I want to leave, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Because I think if you even talk about Cristiano Ronaldo as a bit of a comparison, I think there was a breakdown in the relationship between Florentino Perez, and perhaps he was not as wanted as much. And I think that owed to the reasons as to why he wanted to leave. Whereas here, I think Real Madrid clearly do want Varane to stay, but perhaps Varane's not going to budge, and he might think that he has better opportunities elsewhere because he is such an in-demand player. And very similar to that kind of Man United example, they could very, very well do with another centre back, right? So I think that's where Real Madrid kind of leave themselves off to. But I think, culminating this video, we've discussed, I think, the legacy of Ramos, where he'll go as well in the future, and what he means. I think just to kind of close off, I'd probably say that I think if you're a Real Madrid fan, there's probably just a lot of great moments that you've gotten to experience over the last 16 years. So fundamentally, as sad as this could be in the short term, it's a special thing to actually have been able to watch Ramos play, I think, under the Real Madrid shirt, and it can only be a source of good memories, really. So so he closes off a wonderful chapter of his life, and as we saw in the live stream, sat with 22 trophies. There can be nothing bad about that, and I think Ramos always has a home in Real Madrid. As ironic as it is that he doesn't have Real Madrid as a home temporarily, but these are the things in football that happen, and I think just for example, like if you look at Barcelona, players like Iniesta or Xavi still leaving, not actually ending their careers there. That's a very common occurrence for these kind of big clubs, but these players are still part of the lifeblood of the club, and they will be for the rest of time. So